Hello, my name is Eva Keller and welcome to this video about business decision making. Decisions are something we take every day and there are many definitions for this term. One of them being the learned habitual response pattern exhibited by an individual when confronted with a decision situation. Decisions are taken in many different contexts, including business contexts, which is what led to 3 different research questions for this project. The first being if there's a relation between gender and decision-making style, and if there's a difference between gender, if there's a relationship between decision-making styles and business experience, and finally, which factors can negatively influence the decision-making process of a management team in an internship company. To begin the research, a literature review was conducted. Many different articles speak about decision-making styles, and there have been many different theories and contributions. For example, Rowan Mason identified 4 different styles that are based on 2 different dimensions, whereas Scott and Bruce have identified 5 specific and distinct decision-making styles. So these 5 decision-making styles are important for the further continuation of the research because these are used in the primary research as well. So they have identified a scale with 5 different factors of decision-making styles. The first being rational, which is based on thought and logic. The second being intuitive, which is more based on feelings. Dependent decision-making depends on the advice of others. Avoidant means that the decision is pushed away as long as possible. And spontaneous decision-making is a more instantaneous form of decision-making. The literature review also revealed a number of other factors which can influence decision-making. The first being age. Some research has shown that there is a relationship between age and decision-making. For example, Liu found out that the older one gets, the less they tend to rely on intuitive and avoidant decision-making styles. Gender is another factor, although there is some debate about this. Some researchers found that there is no real relationship between gender and decision-making style, while others show that there is a relationship. For example, research by Sallow and Alwood has found that male investigators are more reliant on rational decision-making, whereas female investigators place higher value on dependent decision-making. Stress seems to be another important contributor that influences decision-making. For example, stress seems to be associated with more avoidant styles and dependent styles as well. And overall, it is seen as a more negative influencer. And finally, one must of course take into account the individual differences. For the methodology of this research, the research onion by Saunders was used, which identifies 6 different layers of the research onion, which must be discussed. So the first is the philosophy. For this research, the pragmatic philosophy was used, seeing as it considers concepts that are relevant when they support action, and the research is complex and external. The research approach is abductive, seeing as both qualitative and quantitative research are used based on existing theories, with primary research supporting the research question. The research choice is mixed methods, seeing as both quantitative and qualitative research methods are used. The strategy for this research is a survey which was conducted among IBMS students, as well as a case study which highlights the importance of the context. The time horizon is cross-sectional, seeing as it confronts a particular phenomenon at a particular time, which in this case are business students during their final year. Finally, the techniques and analysis will be discussed further as they are addressed individually. One must also take into account reliability and validity, which have been increased with triangulation and the use of different methods, but of course there are still researcher biases that must be taken into account. For the qualitative part of the research, 2 interviews were conducted, 1 female and 1 male, to make sure about the gender difference as well. Both interviews were done face-to-face and were semi-structured in order to leave room for extra questions and to obtain as much information as possible. Then the interviews were coded with Apttus TI, transformed into a matrix structure, and finally visualized with a network. Both interviewees had just completed their internships, meaning that they are familiar with business decision-making and managerial structure. The qualitative research was mainly focused on answering the questions of which factors can negatively influence the decision-making process of management teams in your internship company. So the research was coded into a matrix configuration based on the different questions where different factors were found and highlighted. Once all of the questions were analyzed in this way, a network was formed. And with the network, I was able to find different factors which do negatively impact decision making. So in this case, I found that high expectations, stress, and time pressure all negatively influence decision making. And here's another visualization of this with the different questions linking to it and different answers. There were some factors that positively influence decision making, such as sufficient information, rationality, sufficient time, and confidence. So if these factors are lacking, it could negatively influence decision making. So thanks to the interviews, I was able to identify 4 main influencers which negatively impact managers' decision-making process, which are stress, time pressure, rushing, and high expectations. For the quantitative portion of the research, a survey was conducted among IBMS students in their final year. All of the research was then coded into SPSS for further analysis, where reliability testing and hypothesis testing was. With the reliability test function in SPSS, the Cronbach's alpha was determined at 0.797, which is higher than 0.7, making the test reliable overall. The second part of the quantitative research was testing a number of hypotheses, mainly the 2 research questions, which are the relationship between gender and decision-making style and the relationship between business experience and decision-making style. So here in SPSS, we can analyze all of the given data. Here are all of the different questions which are coded based on the different type of decision-making style. Then in order to test the hypotheses, chi-square analyses were conducted, which can be done here by going into crosstabs. Well, here, for example, between business experience and spontaneous decision-making, you can then click OK to see if there's a relationship. Here we can read the chi-square, which has a value of 0.580, which is higher than 0.05, meaning that there is no significant relationship between business experience and spontaneous decision-making for this question. So these kind of tests were conducted for all different questions of the questionnaire between both gender and all questions, as well as business decision-making style and all questions. And unfortunately, no relationships were found. As here is an example, at 95% confidence level, there is no significant relationship between gender and rational decision making. And again, for all the other questions, the same was found, that there was no significant relationship. So based on all these tests, we can say that in both cases, the H0 was confirmed, that there is no relationship between gender and decision making style, and that there is no relationship between business experience and business decision making style. Now that all of the data has been analyzed, both quantitative and qualitative, we can go back and look at the research questions to answer them. So first off, is there a gender difference regarding business students' decision-making styles? According to the research of the questionnaire, there is no gender difference. This is partially in line with the literature review, which found that several studies show that there is no gender difference. However, some studies show that there is a gender difference, but it is still a debatable subject, meaning that this could definitely be seen as valid. The primary research here shows that there is no relationship between business students' decision-making style and their business experience. This contradicts what Liu found, where they suggest that increased experience can decrease reliance on intuitive and avoidant decision-making styles. However, one must take into account that the sample size in this case was fairly limited, and also there was a general lack of overall business experience, relatively speaking. So that could explain these differences, and it could also mean that this research may not be good to generalize for a larger population. Finally, 4 main factors were identified which negatively influence decision-making process, which were stress, high expectations of supervisors, time pressure, and rushing. This is also in line with research found in the literature review, which suggests stress and time pressure as influencers on decision making. And here's once again an overview of all the final conclusions. Thank you for watching, And finally, here are the references of the main articles that were used for this study.